Welcome, listeners, to Together with Feeding New York State. I'm Ryan Healy,
And I'm Alyssa Harry-Nannon.
and today we're excited to be joined by Joanna Dorsey, Executive Director of Policy and Social Impact with Black Farmers United of New York State. Joanna, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so we're super excited for you to be here and learn more about Black Farmers United. So can we just start with you telling us more about your organization?
Absolutely. And thank you for having me. So Black Farmers United New York State is a member-led organization of over 150 Black farmers, land stewards, and food justice advocates across the state. So we're a newer organization. We were just founded in 2020. The organization was actually conceptualized by one of our founding members, Karen Washington. She's really popular in the agricultural space, especially among BIPOC farmers, and we lovingly refer to her as Mama K. So, following the data released for the 2019 Ag Census, Mama K put out a call to a circle of other Black farmers within her network. This was really due in part to the data that was released. The number of Black farmers accounted for across New York State was astounding. It was super low, and it felt like year after year that the numbers were dwindling. There was also a lot of fear that the urban farmers that were present in New York State, our downstate farmers, were not accounted for in the census data. And also, there was fear that they didn't have the community support that they needed to thrive in the agricultural space in the state. So BFU was formed and continues to serve as a space for Black farmers to convene and to be educated and to build community and to share mutual aid.
Joanna, that's really helpful context. For our listeners, could you give us a sense of the state of Black farmers' representation in the New York food system?
Absolutely. So Black farmers' representation in our New York State food system has faced historical and ongoing challenges, but there have been efforts to uplift and advocate for their inclusion. These challenges really stem from challenges that include land access, limited resources, and a lack of representation in the policymaking spaces. But the push for food justice and sustainability, as well as equity, is creating pathways for greater involvement and support for Black farmers. I would say specifically in the area of urban agriculture, areas like New York City, Black farmers have had more visibility and presence in the urban agricultural space. So they contribute significantly to the food justice movements. They operate community gardens that really provide fresh food to historically underserved communities. Through these initiatives, really, they not only offer food, but they also serve as hubs for education and wellness for these underserved communities. And now I'll turn now to the rural representation. So, although the presence of Black farmers in rural New York and upstate is significantly smaller, organizations like BFU, of course, are working to bridge this gap by advocating for the needs and the resources that are needed for farmers in our upstate community. So this includes things like land access, agricultural training, and of course, like funding and how to access funding. We actually have a new program that we're set to launch by the winter of next year called Green Futures. That program is really designed to create that urban to rural pipeline, which would pair beginning farmers with more experienced farmers upstate, so that they can get a hands-on experience in land cultivation and farming. I also would say that the visibility of Black farmers is growing through platforms like the National Bugs Conference, which, if you're not familiar with it, it's called the Black Urban Growers Conference. They started here in New York State, but they're now a national conference. They've been operating for about a decade now. And then, of course, Black Farmers United is launching next year our own conference. In partnership with Bugs, the Black Urban Growers Conference, but this one is specific to New York State, and it's called the Black Agriculturalist Conference. We're calling it Black for short, and that'll be hosted next spring in April, the first week in April. So this space serves as a place to build community and to highlight the achievements, as well as address the challenges that Black farmers face in New York State and beyond.
That's awesome. Okay, well, it sounds like you guys are doing such incredible work. You're talking about these conferences, land access, green futures, a lot of really great programs. And so I would love to one, just hear about all of this. But why don't we start? I know you just mentioned challenges. So why don't we start again, going back to that historical context a little bit more about why this underrepresentation exists in the first place. I know you mentioned limited resources and issues with urban agriculture. Yes, I'm just curious if you could chat a little bit more about the historical context first.
Sure. So the underrepresentation of Black farmers in New York State's food system is rooted in a long history of economic exclusion and discriminatory agricultural policies. So if you don't mind, we can do a quick historical breakdown that will really add texture to the conversation. So I'll go back as far as the post-Reconstruction era. So after the Civil War, Black Americans made significant strides in acquiring land, particularly in the South, through the promise of land reforms such as the 40 Acres and a Mule initiative. But these gains were largely erased as Jim Crow laws and violence against Black landowners led to widespread land dispossession. So by the early 20th century, Black farmers owned about 14 million acres of land nationwide. But due to decades of legal and extra legal actions, which include things like forced sales, intimidation, and of course, the violence in the South and the lynching, the vast majority of this land was lost. So today, Black farm owners own less than 1% of U.S. farmland. I'll move forward a bit to the 1930s. So that this is the New Deal era of the 1930s. And during that time, we saw the establishment of the USDA, the U.S. Department of Agriculture. They established programs that were meant to help farmers during the Great Depression. However, Black farmers were systemically excluded from some of these programs. They were excluded from accessing loans and subsidies and resources that were widely available to other farmers in the US. And this was partly because the local officers in the USDA offices were really steeped in their racial biases. It was a lot of discrimination that went under the rug or that was blatant, but that was just allowed to pass, and they denied Black farmers access to critical programs. And this continued the cycle of land loss and economic disenfranchisement for Black farmers. So then we get to about the 1950s, 1970s, which was the era of the Civil Rights Movement. So during this time, a lot of Black families fled the South to escape the violence and the killings by groups such as like the KKK, and they left behind land and farming practices, and they moved to more urbanized areas further up north, like Baltimore, Philadelphia, and even New York. Also, there was what you call the Great Migration during this time, where they moved to places like Chicago and Detroit and other areas in the Midwest, and then also as far west as areas like Los Angeles and California. So by doing so, they left behind the practices of farming and traded in land in the South for smaller urban communities where there was no place to farm. So that's kind of where we are now. And because of the land access issue continues to be a setback for Black people today. We still have we've really seen little to no improvement to the state of Black farmers. In fact, we've seen the number of Black farmers continue to drop, unfortunately. So to answer the second part of your question, I think there are a few negative consequences to this underrepresentation. One that really sticks out for me the most is the loss of agricultural diversity. So the exclusion of Black farmers from the food system has contributed to the loss of agricultural knowledge and practices that promote biodiversity. So historically, Black farmers have really engaged in diverse and sustainable farming methods that really prioritize soil health and crop variety. I'll tell you a quick story. Around the time when slavery was happening and when ships were sent to Africa to pull slaves from their home and bring them over to the Americas, the African women, what they would do to preserve their history and take a piece of what they had with them is that they would braid seeds from their homeland into their hair. and they took these seeds with them, hidden in their hair, all the way through the Middle Passage. And if you've ever heard, or if in the future you hear the expression braiding seeds, that's where that comes from. So the displacement of Black farmers has really reduced the overall diversity of agricultural practices. Um, it's lent to a more industrialized and monocultural farming in many regions in the U.S. So without the inclusion of these marginalized farming communities, we really risk a food system that really can't withstand the environmental changes that we face, such as soil degradation, and we have a system that lacks the resilience in the face of climate change.
Joanna, that's really helpful in understanding not just the historical context, but also the implications for our food system today. Could you tell us a little bit more about Black Farmers United nine solutions to address racial inequity in New York agriculture?
Of course. So our non-solutions are a set of what we feel are answers or solutions to the setback that our members and other BIPOC farmers face. I think the three solutions that really resonate and speak to the work that I do within BFU would be solution number two, which is to fund Black farms and startups. Solution number four, which is to provide exceptional education. And then solution number six, which is a commitment to inclusion. All of the non-solutions really touched on an area of importance within the Black farmer ecosystem.
That's awesome. So yeah, so I know that you mentioned the three that are most dear to you. I'm curious to hear more about funding Black startups and what that looks like.
Yeah, so investing in Black food systems, and specifically the entrepreneurs that run these communities, is really a key part of my work with BFU, particularly through our policy and advocacy. We're looking for direct support, and we provide direct support with community-based initiatives. So specifically, I've been working closely with New York State legislators to push for bills like the Good Food New York bill, which Ryan and I both sit on the coalition for, and then also the Farm Bill, which really aims to provide equitable funding and procurement opportunities for Black farmers. I've been involved in agricultural projects that create spaces for Black food entrepreneurs to really help grow them and sell their produce locally. This includes working on urban farms and developing community-supported agricultural programs in our underserved communities. Um, and then if I can, lastly, I'd really like to highlight a few of our members who are doing great work within this space to really uplift that solution, to provide, to invest in our Black food systems as well as in our Black agriculturalists and entrepreneurs. So we have one member in particular, Christine Hutchinson, who runs a nonprofit for youth called Our Core. And then we have another member named Tamika Duncan, who is located in the Hudson Valley area. She runs a co-op space for education and business development. And then we have Miss Pam James, and then also Monty Lawson, who in their prospective communities are also providing exceptional resources and educations to their communities. Miss Pam is in the Buffalo area, and Monty's farm is in Tompkins County, so like the Hudson Valley region. So through these programs, they're really helping emerging Black food entrepreneurs navigate the complexities of starting and growing their businesses, such as securing capital, understanding regulations within the ag space, and really providing technical assistance and teaching BIPOC farmers how to market their products.
You know, Joanna, that's super helpful context, and also want to appreciate the work of your members across the state, and as well as your emphasis on state level initiatives, including Good Food New York. So another one of the nine solutions is to create ownership opportunities for Black farmers. So what are some ways that New York State can expand ownership for Black farmers, for migrant workers, and undocumented farm workers?
So I think that expanding ownership opportunities for these groups of people really requires a holistic approach. First, I would say that land access is essential, but it must be paired with capital to sustain farming operations. We need capital for things like managing the cost of labor, for equipment and infrastructure. And then additionally, there is a need to provide training and capacity building for young people to become the successors of these agricultural businesses and really to ensure the long-term viability of these businesses. So I would say to accomplish this, New York State can increase funding for land trust and cooperative ownership models. They can expand access to low interest loans for grants and grants for marginalized farmers, and then also create mentorship and apprentice programs to train the next generation of farmers. Um, One bill that comes to mind with that is Senator Henchy's bill, the Youth and Ag bill. It was actually passed last year. So collaborations between state institutions and nonprofits, I believe, will really be the key to building more inclusive and equitable agricultural economies.
Absolutely, yeah. And I 100% second that. I think especially things like sustained capital and like making sure there's space for training capacity and some of those loans makes so much sense in making sure that we are uplifting all of these different groups. And
Mhm.
so also thinking not only at the state level, but moving to the national level, I'm curious about what are some ways that the US can help to support Black farmers as well.
I love this question because I have so many ideas that I've just been wanting to share and hoping that throughout the work that's being done with BFU that we might have a chance at some point to implement these through partnerships with the our national government. But so at a national level, I really believe that support for Black farmers looks like policy reform, financial investments, land access initiatives, and creating programs aimed at restoring a lot of the historical injustices. So when we look at the idea of land access and ownership, to me, that looks like establishing federally supported land trusts and cooperatives specifically for Black farmers. This could really help to reverse the historical land loss that we mentioned earlier. A federal initiative could be created to compensate for the historical land theft and the discrimination Black farmers have faced throughout the years. Many Black farmers have lost their land through heirs property disputes. So that's land passed down without a clear legal title. So strengthening federal protections for heirs properties and providing legal counsel and legal resources to help these families really maintain the ownership is another way when we bring up financial support and access to capital. So many Black farmers are really burdened down with the debt that comes with generations of discrimination and economic exclusion. So I'm thinking of national debt relief programs specifically targeted for Black farmers could really level the playing field. This could allow them to reinvest in their farms and sustain their operations. And then lastly, I believe that offering grants specifically for Black farmers without the need of repayment would really provide the financial support for land acquisition. This would help them build their infrastructure, maintain their infrastructure, and then expand their farm businesses.
Joanna, I appreciate the comprehensive set of solutions and that it's everything. It's land access, it's that direct financial support, that debt relief. These are all going to be critically important to be addressed, not just here in New York State, of course, but at the national level. So just want to appreciate that. So how can nonprofits, municipal institutions, food industry partners better support Black farmers? And what about consumers?
Yeah, so I believe that nonprofits and institutions and food partners can really play a significant role by helping with providing resources. Advocacy is another big piece, and then also partnerships, collaborations. We just did a conference for a workshop for Congressional Black Caucus, and we talked about how cross-sector collaboration can really lead to holistic solutions for some of the problems that we see in our food systems. So partnerships, I think partnerships and collaboration is key. And then also providing opportunities for market access. So when we talk about nonprofits, for instance, nonprofits could really help within this space by providing financial support and capacity building through things like grant programs and microloans. So what's coming up for me is the idea of nonprofits establishing grant programs within their networks of donors and givers, partners. To really partner with foundations to create microloans and funds that are specifically aimed for Black farmers. And through these funds could really help farmers purchase land and equipment and the materials needed to develop and sustain their businesses. When I think about municipal institutions, on a municipal level, they can create or expand farmers markets or intentionally seek out Black vendors for these farmers markets that exist all over. I'm thinking specifically in New York City. Cities specifically can offer subsidies or incentives that can help Black farmers access cold storage and transportation and other vital infrastructure that is really needed to scale up their businesses and help them reach larger markets. And municipal governments could also establish policies that allocate vacant public land for farming, specifically reserving those plots for Black farmers. And when I think about, I believe the second part of your question was about consumers. I would really say that being intentional with how you where you buy. If you're at a farmer's market and you see Black farmers, they're probably underrepresented at that specific market. So really sewing into that business, being intentional where you spend your dollars to really help support those farmers. Um, and the good thing about our farmers, one thing that I didn't get a chance to mention, with the types of diversity in the crops grown by Black farmers is really amazing. And this goes back even to the braiding seeds conversation. A lot of our farmers really focus on that diversity and culturally relevant produce. So with consumers, this really presents you with an opportunity to try out different produce or to be exposed to like different fruits and vegetables that you would otherwise not really try if you hadn't been exposed to them or seen it at the market produced by a Black or BIPOC farmer. So it's really exciting on both ends. It's really a win-win situation, I believe. You're helping and then you're also getting an experience at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. I really appreciate hearing that. And that's something that we need so much more of in this space. And we're hearing so much is that we need more culturally relevant food. And this is a perfect way to, like you said, like help on both ends. And I really appreciate hearing your answers to these questions because it's obvious that there's so much we could do, whether it's at the state level or the national level, or as consumers, or as nonprofits, or municipalities, like the list goes on and on. There's so many different ways that we can just come together and just help support each other, help Black farmers, help those that have disproportionately been affected and impacted in this way. So I really appreciate hearing these solutions. One thing that I want to turn back to that you mentioned a little bit ago is the Good Food New York bill, which I will add passed both the Senate and Assembly with bipartisan support and is currently awaiting the governor's signature, just for some background context to our listeners. Could you tell us a little bit more about this bill, what it would do, and where it currently stands?
Yes, yes. So the Good Food New York bill is an amazing piece of legislation. It's really proposed it really aims to align the public food procurement program with values-based purchasing. Some key pieces of the bill are really about promoting food justice, health equity, and sustainable agricultural practices. The bill is designed to ensure that the public institutions in New York, such as the schools, hospitals, correctional facilities, that they really prioritize buying food that meets specific criteria related to environmental sustainability, fair labor practices, nutrition, and then also a big piece of it is support for local farmers, specifically those from historically marginalized groups. The bill would establish new procurement standards for state agencies and public institutions. These standards are based on a set of values that prioritize health, economic sustainability, and local economic development. Public institutions would then also, under this bill, need to report on their food purchasing and demonstrate how they meet these standards, really ensuring that that idea of transparency and accountability. For the public. And then lastly, the bill also provide incentives or assistance to help institutions transition into purchasing from local farmers. The bill did pass, like you said, in the state and the assembly, but it is currently awaiting, like you mentioned, the signature from Governor Hochul. So we're really hopeful that her office really sees the value in this bill, specifically for what it does for our local economy. When I think when you look at the way that the farming industry has become so it's like like it's very just a few super farms really control this industry, and it really leaves our local farmers in a position where they're struggling to even make ends meet. And it isn't just Black farmers. There are other farmers across the state who are also in the same space, just really needing the extra boost that this bill could provide. And it would really help to boost the local economy. When you see spending that is being done locally, that helps businesses thrive. It helps people thrive. They're getting access to healthier food choices, more value-based food choices. There's only positives to that. So we're really hoping within the coalition work that we're doing that Governor Hochul and the local municipalities as well really get behind this bill so that we can see it through to completion.
Absolutely. It would be a transformative change for municipalities, municipal institutions to really be able to leverage that purchasing power to help create a more just and equitable food system. Thanks for highlighting that important piece of legislation. We have an important last question. So, what's one call to action you have for our listeners?
Ooh, that's a good one. Um, I would say really the best thing you can do is really advocate for public policy change. That is really the only way that we're going to see change. The best way to see change is through policy. So advocate for equity in farm policies, petition for land reform, and then also support local procurement policies like the Good Food Bill. Advocate for your local government institutions like the schools and the hospitals to adapt
Right.
policies that really prioritize purchasing. Um, of course, I'm gonna highlight the Good Food Bill again because it's just it can't be stated enough the importance of this bill and really how this bill passing in New York State would really set the tone for the rest of the nation. So that would be my call to action.
Well, you heard it here, listeners. Joanna Dorsey, Executive Director of Policy and Social Impact with Black Farmers United of New York State. Thanks for joining us today, Joanna. And remember, listeners, together we can end hunger and poverty here in New York State. Thank you.